Hi everyone, if you watched last video, you might remember that I end that video with an image or a picture of the main points of last video, and I'm going to share it to you today again. And then here again I have the image, and you can see the results of being filled with God's or understand God's will in our life. So that's from verse 9, and so when we live a life that is pleasing to God, verse 10, we will live a life that is pleasing to God by bearing fruit in every good work, growing in the knowledge of God, being strengthened by God's power to have endurance and patience, and giving joyful thanks to the Father. Now this here says verse 11, but it's actually verse 12. And this is the verse that introduces to these next points that we're gonna talk today. So for today, as you see the title, the reasons for Thanksgiving. And there are three reasons for Thanksgiving that Paul here kind of explains to the Colossians. And the first one is from the verses that we're going to focus today, from verse 12 to 14. Then it's for verse 15 to 20. That's the second part. And then the last one is 21 to 23. So just to go for the first section that we're going to focus today, the first reason why of Paul's Thanksgiving for the Colossians, we can see in verse 12. So this first reason, it is because of the Colossians came to the faith of Christ, of Jesus Christ, as an act of grace, as a divine act of grace, because they were qualified or made fit. You know, if you see verse 12, that's the verse, they were qualified to share an inheritance that was actually exclusively for Israel. So the language that Paul is using for these verses, the verse 12 to 14, it is like an Old Testament language. Just think about the image of Israel exodus from Egypt, right? And their entrance to the promised land. So the inheritance, the word here Paul uses, is kind of like alluding to the entrance of the Israelites to Canaan. So here Paul, it is using the same language by telling to the Colossians, those who have received the inheritance in the light and live according to that light can be called the sons of the children of the light. And there are many verses, many passages, of course, that we see in the New Testament, like in Luke 16 or John or 1 Thessalonians. And now the next verse, verse 13, it is the same language. Paul is using the same language from the Old Testament, from the Exodus. Just look at what verse 13 says. He has delivered us from the domain of darkness and transferred us to the kingdom of his beloved Son. So here we see the same scenario or same image of the people of Israel get delivered by the dark power of the Egyptians and then taken to the promised land. Or using Paul's language, transfer them into the promised land. So here Paul is using the same language, right? And if we kind of put together verse 12 and verse 13, we're going to see that in this language, Paul is saying that it is only because of God's grace that we've been qualified, right? That's his word he uses, that we've been qualified to share that inheritance. And it was God who delivered us from the dominion of darkness to be part of our Lord Jesus Christ's kingdom. As I mentioned before, it is an act of divine grace. And it is only through our Lord Jesus Christ, as it says in verse 14, if you can read verse 14, that you have that redemption and that forgiveness of sin. So that is why we could also join the Apostle Paul in thanksgiving, because we are also part of the same kingdom. We share the same inheritance that we see here in these verses. We were delivered from the dominion of darkness to be put onto this precious kingdom so that we can live a life that is holy. We can live a life that honors and glorifies God, because of his grace and his love. And as we saw before, right, through his power, through his help, that we can accomplish this. So it's a great verses to help us remember our life before Christ, and how is that only because of Christ and only because of God who qualified us, right? That's what Paul says. He qualified us to share that inheritance through Christ, through our Lord Jesus Christ. So this is a great verse to remember that, to remember his salvation and just thank him, right? To live this. That's why I say, right? It's so important that we live this Thanksgiving life, this thankful life all the time, right? There's every day that we wake up and God has given us another day so that we can live a life that honors Him, that we can share this love to our family, to our neighbors, to our friends, and also to share this precious salvation that we got through Jesus Christ.